When cruelty goes beyond all conceivable limits, anything can happen. For example, in today's story, these negative qualities have led to several decades of investigations, and even with dubious results. Wendy Camp grew up on a large farm and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. At the age of 16, she began dating a college student named Christopher Brito. Soon, the girl became pregnant, and they got married. In 1986, their daughter Cynthia was born. When the baby was 6 months old, Chris's parents convinced him to break up with Wendy and return to his homeland. Now Wendy was left alone with a little daughter in her arms. They lived in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, USA. The family supported the young mother, but Wendy dreamed of becoming independent. So she got a job as a waitress at a local restaurant. There she met Chad Now in 1987. The young people quickly found a common language and began dating. The mother loved her daughter very much, but it was not easy to cope with the child's needs alone. Therefore, she was happy to start a relationship with her new partner Chad. They developed quickly. Soon the couple got married. This happened immediately after the young woman learned about the pregnancy. At that time, they did not have their own home, and the couple lived with Wendy's parents. In 1988, she gave birth to a son, who was named Jonathan. Suddenly, after giving birth, the young mother became a godmother. She spent several months in the hospital unconscious, while doctors figured out why a woman of her age was experiencing such severe health problems. During this time, her daughter Cynthia lived with Wendy's parents, and baby Jonathan lived in 2 houses. Sometimes with Wendy's parents, sometimes with his father and his parents. She was eventually diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. No one expected Wendy to have such serious health problems. One way or another, doctors managed to help her. She was discharged after a few months. The woman still had difficulties with her hands. Physical activity was required for rehabilitation, a lot of training. She immediately began to strictly follow all the doctor's orders. Wendy could cope with her older daughter, but she couldn't cope with the younger child. Therefore, she needed help from her loved ones. Wendy was mostly helped by her mother. Her sister Aisha Hashmi also looked after the child from time to time, but she was pregnant herself, so she couldn't take on much of the responsibilities. Her mother-in-law, Beverly Noe, who had already become attached to the baby, also helped with the boy. The boy's father, Chad, did not show much zeal. He was not interested in his stepmother and wife. The new husband openly said that he did not want to take care of the disabled person and her daughter. Many noticed that the husband behaved coldly towards his loved ones. This seemed unacceptable to many. In fact, the situation was even worse. When Wendy came out of her coma, the trial began. It turned out that while his wife was in a coma, Chad filed for divorce. Without warning anyone, his mother Beverly also filed a lawsuit. The woman was trying to gain custody of her grandson, intending to write off Wendy as incompetent. The mother-in-law told everyone that she wanted to help the boy, who could suffer at the hands of his helpless mother. At first, the couple's close circle listened to this. People saw how hard it was for Wendy to cope with the baby and realized that he would be better off with his grandmother. However, suspicions gradually arose that Beverly's intentions were not entirely pure. However, the woman sincerely loved her grandson and did not want to trust the child to Chad, as she knew very well what problems her son faced. Due to his addiction to illegal substances, Chad also could not take on the responsibility of guardianship over the boy. He already had several children from different women. There were rumors that even minors gave birth to his children. He did not look after any of them, did not provide financial support. The man simply didn't care. Beverly and Chad's behavior caused a lot of controversy and disagreement. Wendy's loved ones condemned her husband and mother-in-law. Despite the complete indifference of her exes and minimal help from her family, this did not break Wendy. After some time, with the help of medication and constant physical exercise, the heroine of the story's condition improved. She was even able to find another man named Lyon Camp. They met in 1990. They both immediately felt mutual sympathy and started dating. The couple supported each other, and not only in terms of rehabilitation after illness. The woman spent all her free time after coming out of the coma fighting to regain custody of Jonathan, as she had not voluntarily given up the child. She managed to go to court and obtain the right to visit her son, although Beverly, who was his primary guardian at the time, tried in every way to prevent this. According to her mother-in-law, the young mother was dangerous due to her serious condition, but everyone knew it was a lie. At that point, Wendy had already fully recovered and was coping with all her worries. This was proven. A few months later, the boy's mother began visiting her former mother-in-law with Lyon. However, the problems were just beginning. The mother-in-law immediately disliked the man, and she came up with a new plan to get rid of the couple. After about a month of such visits, Beverly stopped all meetings, citing that Lyon was pestering the boy. Lyon categorically denied all this. After this, Wendy felt fierce opposition from the woman. Her visits with her son were always very difficult. Beverly even ignored a court order that said the mother had the right to see her son. It all came to a head when one day the mother came to see her baby, but instead found an empty house. It turned out that the mother-in-law had moved without informing about her new place of residence. Wendy still managed to contact Beverly. Only a few days later, after a conversation on the phone, they agreed to meet the following weekend. But that day the woman spontaneously announced that they were traveling, so they would not be able to meet either. The visits were postponed each time, canceled, ended in disagreements, and unfounded accusations of Lyon that he had harassed Jonathan, then disagreement about the view on raising a child. All this came to the test, but even the court considered such accusations unfounded. There was absolutely no evidence that the man had an unhealthy interest in the boy. Wendy's statement was received by the court. It was confirmed that Chat and Beverly were preventing them from seeing the child illegally. Both were accused of failing to comply with the court order. However, this did not affect anything. The biological father and his mother continued to create obstacles for Wendy to communicate with their son. After some time, Wendy did not have the opportunity to see the child at all. Beverly took him and hid him. The boy's mother's family even had to hire a private detective to track him down. Unfortunately, he was never able to do so, as the family did not have enough money to pay for his work for a long time. They could no longer provide the detective with work, but they also had no time to find out where Jonathan was. The situation looked increasingly alarming. After a while, Beverly, Chat, and the boy showed up again. A new judge's order was issued, ordering that the child and mother be allowed to meet. Against this background, it is not entirely clear why Wendy's family did not seek to have the couple charged with kidnapping, although their behavior could be assessed as such. Perhaps the young mother did not want to make the situation worse. Everyone believed that such an attitude towards Wendy was unjustified, since she was not a bad mother and did not voluntarily give up custody of her son. The woman never suffered from addictions. Beverly and Chat's behavior could be considered illegal. There were many strange things about the situation as a whole. For example, why the judge did not return the biological mother's primary custody rights over her child, despite the fact that she had almost recovered. On May 29, 1992, Beverly asked her son to meet Wendy and ask if she wanted to see her baby. Chat immediately called her and told her everything. Such a sudden change of attitude seemed strange, but Wendy could not refuse such an opportunity to see her little son. The ex-mother-in-law suggested they meet at her father's house in Shamrock, Oklahoma. Jonathan was 4 years old at the time, having lived with his grandmother for the entirety of that time, and having had very little contact with his mother. Beverly's only stipulation was that Leona not be with them, He agreed. The couple discussed it, and Wendy went to meet him. Later, the man recalled how Wendy was worried, had a premonition of something bad, and he tried to calm her down and convince her that everything would be fine. Beverly's sudden change of mood was attributed to the fact that she was simply tired of the constant problems with the courts and decided to end the dispute. Wendy did not want to go alone. Her 6-year-old daughter, Cynthia, also wanted to see the boy, as well as Leon's sister, Lisa, who was 22 at the time. They all prepared for the trip and the long-awaited meeting with Jonathan. Around 11:30 a.m. on May 29, 1992, Beverly arrived at their house in a car to pick up the group. She was against Cynthia and Lisa going with them, but after some hesitation, she agreed. It was about 150 kilometers to Shamrock. Leon later recalled kissing Wendy goodbye and watching the car drive away. That was the last time he saw them. At 1:40 p.m., Wendy called Leon from the gas station to say they had made it there without any problems. Everyone took turns spending time with the 4-year-old until 4:30 p.m., with the former mother-in-law absent. This also seemed unusually safe, since she had never left Jonathan with his mother without personal supervision before. Then Beverly arrived to pick up Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa. She was going to take them all home. At 4:42 p.m., Wendy called Leon, who was at home, and said that they would all be back soon. The woman used a payphone in a cafe in Shamrock to make the connection. She also said that on the way the women had another argument over Jonathan's upbringing and his grandmother's inappropriate behavior. Despite the conflict, Wendy claimed that the argument had ended quickly and that everything was fine now, and that they would be arriving soon. All this time, Leon had been waiting for Wendy, her daughter, and sister to return, but even by late evening, they had still not returned. The man began to worry, but given the technology of the time, there was no way to contact them. At first, the man assumed that there was some problem on the road that needed to be fixed, such as a flat tire, which is why they were delayed. Leon waited patiently all night, but never received any feedback. No one came. The man couldn't take it anymore, so the next morning, May 30th, he called the Oklahoma City Police Department and reported the 3 missing. Leon told the police the chronology of events and also described in detail his relationship with Beverly, whom he considered an unpleasant, quarrelsome woman because of her conflict and the slander she tried to impose on everyone about him. The detectives enthusiastically took on the case, since it was about the disappearance of a little girl. They were able to quickly track down Beverly and speak with the woman. Tanya was cooperative, but said she had last seen the group when she dropped them off at a Walmart in Chandler, Oklahoma. It was a suburb between Shamrock and Oklahoma City.
Serious conflict occurred between them on the road, provoked by the former daughter-in-law, which forced her to drop everyone off. The woman was sure that Wendy would ask Leon for help, and he would pick them up from the store. After that, Beverly immediately went back to her city to meet her son. They had dinner at a restaurant. Beverly also said that her mother, Ida Pruitt, was in the car with them and heard the beginning of the conflict. The woman could not stand the argument and got out of the car herself before Beverly left the trio at Walmart. Detectives decided to check all the information the woman provided. They first talked to Ida, who repeated Beverly's story. According to Ida, Winnie had been very brazen and defiant that day, so much so that Ida couldn't stand being in the same car with them. So she supported Beverly, who dropped them off in the store's parking lot. Detectives then went to the restaurant. Employees confirmed that Beverly arrived there around 7 p.m., ate a quiet meal with her son, and left. Detectives then went to the Walmart that Beverly described. However, it turned out that on May 29th, no one had seen any of the missing people, not even Beverly's car. This could not be a mistake. Winnie was memorable because of her illness. She walked with her hand pressed to her chest. Unfortunately, there were no CCTV cameras there. The situation was becoming increasingly alarming, as Wendy did not have the medication she was supposed to take daily. The woman had already had an incident where she could not use her pills for a couple of days, and her condition immediately worsened. Leon was very worried about the missing people. He constantly called the police station, hoping to get good news, but to no avail. He himself actively helped with the search. The man did not arouse the suspicions of the police. Investigators immediately doubted the veracity of the former mother-in-law's words. She seemed suspicious enough to them. A simple time analysis showed that Beverly could not have gotten from Chandler to the restaurant by 7 p.m. She simply did not have enough time for this. However, she continued to insist on her story and claimed that she knew nothing about the fate of Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia. Detectives decided to question Wendy's ex-husband, Chad. He stated that the meeting with his son went smoothly, after which his mother took Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia away, and the man never saw them again. Chad passed a polygraph test and was convincing enough to be ruled out as a suspect. He claimed that no one in his family would harm the missing. However, Wendy's parents were convinced that Beverly, her son Chad, and Ida were behind the disappearance of the trio. Because of their conflict, they believed that the mother-in-law lured Wendy to get even with her. Perhaps all three have already been killed. According to the missing woman's mother, Wendy was very close to Leon, and if the three of them had really been dropped off near the store, Wendy would have immediately turned to her new husband or her mother for help. Why the three never called anyone, and what they were doing at Walmart, was unclear. A woman named Catherine Parks was the first to speak to police about the disappearance. She was Beverly's former sister-in-law and told detectives that 2 weeks before the trio disappeared, she heard a woman threatening to kill Wendy if she didn't stop fighting for custody of her son. She also knew that Beverly always carried a .357 revolver in her purse. But when her mother-in-law was approached to confiscate the weapon for examination, the suspect reported that it was stolen. Judging by Catherine's words, Beverly was ready to keep the child at any cost. This immediately alerted investigators, as it was a motive not just for kidnapping, but also for murder. Beverly automatically became the top suspect. Then 2 locals from the town, where Chad lived, came to the police station. During one wild drinking session, he confessed that all 3 would never be found. Unfortunately, there was no exact information about what happened, but it all sounded scary. However, all this existed only as rumors, and the suspects themselves claimed that it was all slander. There was no new information. The investigation gradually stalled. On October 20th, 1993, Wendy, Cynthia, and Lisa were still missing. By that day, a TV story had been filmed about them, although Beverly refused to participate. Detectives still suspected the woman and her son of committing the crime. They were the only people with a motive and a long history of conflict with the missing woman. They were believed to be involved in the disappearance and possibly the triple murder. However, there was no evidence to link them to the case. The investigation gradually petered out, and this situation lasted for almost 2 decades. In 2011, Ida Pruitt, Beverly's mother, died of illness at the age of 82. At the time, she was serving a suspended sentence for arson and insurance fraud, for which she had been charged in 2006. Her accomplice in this crime was her daughter, Beverly No. On her deathbed, Ida never told anything about Wenda, Cynthia, and Lisa. On March 28, 2013, Beverly's 60-year-old brother Grover Pruitt went to the police station. He said that in 1992, he owned about 40 acres of land. He remembered well how Ida and Beverly bought 5 acres from him and immediately moved a trailer onto it. Then his mother Ida asked him to dig a big hole behind the trailer so she could install a septic tank. The son hired an excavator to do the job and noticed that the woman seemed to be in a hurry. Then things got weird because Ida never moved into the trailer. The septic tank was not installed, and she later asked for the hole to be filled in. It was only a day after Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia had disappeared. When Grover did this, he came face to face with Ida. She usually didn't come here at all, but she was here that day. He asked her about the big hole and why she decided to fill it up so suddenly. The woman stated outright that there were several corpses in it. However, he did not take these statements seriously, just chuckled, and then hired another excavator operator to do the job. According to the man, He did not check what exactly his mother wanted to bury, did not look into the hole. A few months later, seedlings were planted in this place. The area became indistinguishable from the rest of the land around the trailer. By the time Grover told this story, the land had long since been sold and was in the possession of other people. But the whole story haunted him for years. Then the man gave the detectives a 12-gauge sawed-off shotgun that the entire Pruitt family treasured. It was a relic of sorts. Then he drove with the police to the place he had described, which was about 30 miles from the Walmart in Chandler that Beverly had pointed out. He showed the place where the septic tank should have been, as he remembered it well. Despite the detective's suspicions, he continued to insist that he was not involved in the probable triple murder that his mother and sister had committed. On April 2, 2013, Grover was once again interrogated. This time, he was approached by a state FBI agent and then 2 U.S. attorneys. The man claimed he had no idea what had happened to Wendy, Lisa, and Cynthia, but he was certain that Beverly and Ida were involved. He again insisted that the septic tank hole that had been hastily dug and then filled and should be dug up, and he suspected that there might be 3 bodies at the bottom. According to the man, Grover had not spoken to his mother or Beverly for a long time, but the last time they met, he heard another strange statement from Beverly. She claimed that she had gone to church and prayed for the salvation of her soul, telling about all the sins she had committed, except for one, which she wanted to take to the grave with her. Grover was sure that this was about the secret connected with the 3 missing persons. On April 15, 2013, police officers organized an excavation in the area. They dug up the hole that Grover had pointed out. At the bottom, at a depth of about 5 meters, they discovered the remains of 3 human bodies, as well as some objects that probably belonged to the victims. In the ground was a backpack labeled Cynthia, a black bag with a medical record labeled Wendy Camp, a .357 revolver, and 2 knives. The firearms matched the description of a revolver that Beverly had owned in the 1990s and was missing. It was believed that the mystery of the 3 people's disappearances had finally been solved. Now it was necessary to conduct an examination, but more as a formality to officially confirm the identification of the victims' bodies. However, the difficulties were just beginning, because now it was necessary to confirm Beverly's participation in the murder of 3 people. For this, it was decided to involve Grover. He was supposed to go undercover and get her to confess. On April 24, 2013, a recording device was placed in his shirt pocket. He drove to Beverly's. Investigators were nearby, listening attentively to the dialogue. The woman was cautious and initially limited herself to ambiguous phrases. Having learned of the police's interest, she blurted out that she had always warned her family against tailing. Interestingly, during this period, Beverly was still on probation after serving a prison sentence for burning down a house. Thanks to this incident, she was able to collect more than $83,000 in compensation from the insurance company. In 2007, she and her mother, Ida, were convicted of conspiracy to commit insurance fraud and arson. The dialogue with Grover showed only that the woman was very careful and was not going to reveal the truth. Her brother also did not admit guilt, but he was nevertheless accused of complicity in the murder of May 10th. Then they added charges of sabotaging the undercover operation, since investigators suspected that he showed Beverly a recording device in his pocket. So she never confessed to anything. There was every reason to suspect the man of complicity. He had already lied to the detectives, since the sale of 5 acres of land to his own mother and sister was a fabrication. In fact, he himself was the official owner together with his wife before selling the entire plot to strangers. In addition, it was considered unlikely that a woman could cope with 3 people alone. The triple murder attracted the attention of journalists and the public. They found Jonathan, who was already 25 at the time. The young man said that he did not believe that his grandmother could have done something like that. The woman herself continued to deny her guilt and accused her brother Grover of actually having dealt with the 3 victims. And now he wants to shift the responsibility onto her. Only on January 10, 2014, the bodies found in the pit were finally identified. All of them, as initially assumed, belonged to the missing persons. The medical examiner ruled their deaths homicides. Lisa had been shot. Wendy Camp had also been shot and stabbed several times. Cynthia was believed to have suffocated because her face was covered with duct tape. Similar pieces of Velcro were found on her wrists and ankles. It was assumed that Beverly and her mother Ida wanted to kill Wendy so that they could raise Jonathan themselves, and Cynthia and Lisa were killed as unwanted witnesses. On March 25, 2014, an arrest warrant was issued for 67-year-old Beverly No. She was taken into custody on the 28th. The woman insisted that she was not involved in the crime, but was forced to plead guilty as part of a plea deal with the prosecution. This was the only way to avoid life in prison if the jury found her guilty. Grover continued to refuse to admit guilt as an accessory, even as his health rapidly deteriorated. Prosecutors offered Beverly a plea deal, believing that her brother might not survive to trial, which would undermine the prosecution's tactics.